Let's jump into it. Great. So we'll welcome everybody to the session. I know a lot of you will join us live, and I think even more of you will join us kind of in a post-recorded session. So to all of you, welcome to the show. This is the Data Mesh Book Club hosted by Andy Mott and myself, Adrian Estala. So let's jump right into it. So before we kind of jump into the details, a book club by design, if in a perfect world, we're all sitting at a coffee shop or a pub and we're talking, sharing ideas and having a good time. And so although we can't kind of replicate that perfectly in a virtual environment, what we do want to make sure that we are encouraging, we want to make sure that we're receiving is feedback and thoughts and ideas, right? The value of the book club is certainly not to listen to Andy and I. The value of the book club, I think, is to get a lot of people, a community with different ideas. We don't have to agree, different ideas, kind of sharing thoughts. And so we will be monitoring the chat. We want to come back to that towards the end. If we can, we'll come into some specific parts during the session if there's something that's important to kind of tackle at that specific point. But even after the show, we welcome comments and thoughts and ideas. And so your feedback, your input, your challenges, so to speak, are going to help us kind of shape the book club. As we get to the next session, the following session, we'll make sure that we improve our delivery, if you will, based on your input. There's hopefully everybody can kind of has a phone or something in their hands. You can kind of scan that. If you don't have if you haven't already accessed a LinkedIn group or you're not really sure how to or haven't shared anything, again, whether this is pre-recorded or live, you guys can scan that link there and it'll take you right to the permission screen to kind of get inside of it. There's some polls that we'll take today, and obviously that's more so for the live group. And so we hope that you will take part in the polls. And so they'll just pop up. They're pretty short. Again, they're meant and designed to kind of help us make sure that we're delivering the right content at the right speed for you. Fantastic. You ready, Andy?
Yes.
Because there's a poll. There's the first poll. All right.
So, do we get to vote? Oh, we do. Nice. How do I click?
No, we don't get to vote.
Oh, right. What a shame. So is it just you and I that can see the poll? I guess it is. We see the results.
I don't know. I think it's probably everybody.
Well, we can talk through the results. I suspect still a few more actually going on.
So we don't have any pros. Not a single pro.
So we've got about 50% of the folks on the call have said that they know the basics but want to learn more. They've got about 20% say they're a bit of a skeptic, and 35% say they're new to data mesh. So that's quite interesting. The skeptic piece is kind of interesting. So I guess are we going to try and convert people? I don't know.
No, so let me say, I've been saving this quote, Andy. So how are you a very good dancer, Andy?
No.
Well, we're going to dance today, right? And there's we'll have to find it now. Let me see if I can pull up. It's in the book on page 43. There's a reference to another author. Zermatt makes a reference and says, instead of trying to win an argument, let us dance through the data mesh arguments, right? Expressing our ideas and emotions through the collaborative virtual I messed this up, the collaborative ritual of dancing. And so instead of arguing about data mesh, we're going to dance through the data mesh concepts, balancing different ideas kind of in a very it's kind of like a ballerina. All right, so I hope your balance is good, Andy. So we'll dance through this. All right, I overplayed that. I'm going to keep going now.
Well, just as you're going to the next slide, sorry to jump in.
Yeah.
If I'm not seeing a lot in the chat, so if folks can't use the chat for whatever reason, then, and it does look like it's kind of disabled for a bunch of people, then my suggestion is to put things into the Q&A, and Adrian and I can, well, I'll monitor them and kind of read out the questions.
Cool.
So yeah, feel free to put things into the Q&A and I'll read those out and we make sure we cover up all the bits and pieces.
Fantastic. All right, let's get into it. So we are covering several chapters in the book, kind of the first two big sections, if you will. Before we do that, I think we're going to just kind of share some ideas, right? So before we actually get into the book, I think it'll be fantastic just for us to kind of share some high level thoughts, right? So call it a summary, call it a kind of an executive view of some of the key concepts. And I think that will put us all in a really good learning place, so to speak. And then we can kind of go back and think about the greater detail that the book offers, right? So Andy, why don't you start us off with why data mesh? But before I do, let me make one more comment. Sorry. I found this really interesting. I'll see if you agree with me. So I read through this book early when it was kind of in that pre-publishing phase, and they were, and I would just kind of read some of the summaries, and I'd go back to the book, and I found that really interesting. I went back and reread the book. It's interesting what you find the second read. I'm not encouraging everyone to read it twice, but I think that when you've had some experience and you've seen, I don't know, 60 or whatever data meshes, and then you go back and actually read the book, I think there's a lot in there that I did not appreciate the first time. I didn't get it. And now that I've seen it, I'm like, oh, that's what Jamak's talking about. And so as you read the book, and there's some parts that don't really resonate, one, let's talk about it. But two, I think later on, you'll appreciate them once you actually start to practice. And some may resonate more than others. So let's talk about why data mesh.
Yeah. Okay, so I've got this is a slide. It's not in the book, but this slide comes from my so I give lots of presentations around data mesh and often get asked why should I care? And so I put this slide together based on my interpretation of kind of the chapter. There's a chapter in the in the early part of the book which kind of talks through the kind of the DAF example and the benefits and things. And so this is my interpretation on the single slide. There's Jamak does it a lot more justice, and there's a lot more words. But if I was to say why anyone should care about data mesh, it's really organizational agility with respect to data, right? So it's this, something changes and we want to be able to respond to that. So I don't know, let's say we're a mobile phone company, or we're a telecoms company, I should say, and Apple release a new product, and we don't have, we don't have the iPhone for the first month or whatever because they've done a deal with someone else. How do we respond, right? What do we make an offer around Android phones, around different contracts, and what do we have to kind of give away to our high value customers to keep them, right? And that sounds like a really simple example. There might be other things, there might be a new regulation comes into the market and we have to figure out how we can deal with that. And historically, some of these responses have taken us longer than I would suggest is, given the investment we make in or companies make in data analytics, I would suggest that the ability to respond hasn't been quite as good as perhaps it should have been. And I think that's to me anyway, the overriding ethos of why you want to do data mesh is basically to be able to respond more quickly with data. And that very much I think comes through in the book. And I think that's, if you take nothing else away from this session today, for those 30-odd% that kind of said they're kind of new to data mesh, that would be the thing that I would take away. That's the reason why anyone should care about this. So
I love it. I'll add one more thing since we're talking about the why data mesh. On page 96, there's a diagram, and hopefully you've got your books out. I've got my book out. I won't hold it up to the screen because it'll be too small for you. But on page 96, there's a top left, I think, there's a diagram that shows organizational complexity, kind of as a vertical axis, and as a horizontal axis, you've got data complexity, and then talks about the inflection point, right? I think that's chapter 6.
Yep.
Love that diagram. I think it's so telling. I see you sit there and you think about it, and that's the why, right? That we, on top of the business outcomes that we're driving and so forth. First and foremost, is we've got growing business complexity, more and more people asking for data, asking for different types of data. You can't ever model it the perfect way to meet every answer. There's growing business and organizational complexity. And then at the same time, you've got this growing data complexity, data in more places, data in more forms, data all over the place, so to speak. And so growing data complexity, growing business and organizational complexity, there's that inflection point, that tipping point where you say, all right, hold on a second, we have to do something different. And so I think that's a really good, baseline to think about why data mesh. So fantastic.
Yeah. Just to jump on that. So, because this is another question I get asked often by when I do presentations, people say, how big does my company have to be for data mesh to make sense? Right. And I kind of think that's the wrong question, is how fast is my business changing? And it feeds very much into your inflection point comment, right? So How many new data sources do I have? How many things are changing in terms of the BI requirements or data mining, machine learning, whatever requirements? What's the change? What's the scale of change? And I think that again, that's my interpretation of kind of Zhamak's picture there of that kind of inflection point.
Yeah,
Is
she
scale
calls
of
it out
change.
directly. I think she says sustained agility in the face of growth, and that resonates with me, right? Sustained. It's sustained agility, right? You know it's going to change. You accept the change, and I've got to find a way to kind of perform and maintain sustained performance. So you and I, you're talking about your storytelling. You and I tell different stories about data mesh, and I don't think that we necessarily tell, fundamentally different stories. It's the way that we tell the story that's different, I think. And I value listening to yours because I think it's really good for a certain type of audience. Mine is kind of more.
Don't offend my people.
No. Mine is kind of more of an elevator speech, like executive. I always say before I can kind of get into any of the details and principles, I need to kind of just give them something simple, an easy foundation to build on. But why don't you tell your story first, Andy, and then I'll tell mine, and then we'll move into the book. So there you go.
So just before I jump into this, we've got a couple of questions. I'm going to come back to both. There's a question in the chat and a question in the Q&A that come in. We'll come back to both of those momentarily because they're both good questions. But I think they're better served when we get kind of to that area, if that's okay.
Yeah.
So when I talk about data mesh and what data mesh is, I come back to these 4 pillars, and these 4 pillars are basically from the book. And to a large extent, I would say that I'm an evangelist of Zhamak's view of data mesh. There are some bits and pieces that we disagree on, and we might get onto those today or in the next couple of sessions, kind of getting down to details and implementation. There are some things that I think, and it's my opinion that the book makes things overly complex, or there's kind of gaps, and for good reason. It's very much kind of logical as opposed to physical, and physical sometimes then has an impact on logical. But for the most part, I'm kind of fully on board, right, with Zhamak's view of the world. So the 4 pillars, which are, there's a chapter for each of these in the book. But the way I think about these in kind of summary is we have this concept of domain-driven data ownership. Really, it's a group of people who own the responsibility for getting the data out of the source system, and that's really important, getting the data out of the source system, doing whatever transformation they need to do, and then serving that data as a product. And I'll come back to that piece in a minute. But that, to me, is domain-driven data ownership in a nutshell. We can get into domain-driven design, and we can get into organizational structures, and there's lots and lots to unpack there. But that's really it. It's a group of people sourced to serving. And the reason I come back and I mention this source to serving a lot is because I just see quite a lot of people who sort of talk about data mesh, and really they're talking about analytics, sort of the analytic plane on. So once you've got your data into some sort of tool set, we can now do some analytics. But actually, the ethos of data mesh is from the source system all the way through. And so that data product thing, people sort of say, well, why is this not, how's this different from a table? I would say, and again, sort of breaking this, boiling this all down into as few words as possible, based on my interpretation of the book, is this move from reactive to proactive data management, right? So we don't go, I'm going to build a table and I'm going to put it out there and people are going to, use it. And if they want me to modify it or, whatever, then they're going to phone me up and then I'm going to do the thing I need to do. I'm going to react to their requirements and their wants and needs. Actually, we can move into a different paradigm, which is I'm going to go and find out what people want. I'm going to build what they want. And then I'm going to monitor how they use it. And I'm going to then go back on a regular basis to check that they're using the thing, the data, the table, whatever it is, the product. I'm going to go back and check on a regular basis. I'm going to look at and monitor the usage of the data to make sure that there is value and it's worth keeping. So that to me is data as a product. right? And I know there's a million examples or definitions on the internet at the moment, and Jamat goes into a lot more detail, but reactive to proactive, right? That's it. And if, again, data mesh is those two things. The reality is, to have those two things, you need these other two things, right? So you need the domains. Could be someone in marketing to be able to do that data product, build that data product thing, do the, the proactive monitoring. You need to give them some computers, some technology to do that. And that's really what the self-service infrastructure as a platform is. And we can get into lots of detail about kind of capabilities and that sort of stuff. But really, it's, having maybe a citizen data scientist or a citizen analyst or a generalist in one of those teams who understands data intimately, being able to build those products. And that platform should give them those capabilities to do that. And then the last piece is federated computational governance. And I know Adrian and I have quite a big kind of difference of opinion on this one. Federated computational governance is basically getting people together from those domains to agree a series of rules and then automating those and embedding that automation into our self-service platform, so that when someone in marketing builds a new data product and they put it out there and they publish it, it conforms to some standards. And we know it does that because the infrastructure platform checks as part of that process. And so that is kind of my the way I look at the 4 principles of data mesh. Obviously, we could spend hours and hours on each one and we could dive into them, but that's kind of how I think about data mesh and break it down into those 4 areas.
Awesome. I think when you're so smart that you use words like ethos, I think this approach makes a lot of sense.
Did I say ethos? I don't think I did.
No. And again, there's an audience without a doubt, right? It's
yes.
People need to understand the details. I always say, if I'm in a big room and I'm leading a data mesh transformation, I need someone in the room to be an expert on every one of these things, right? And I don't know that any one person is going to build it all, but I need the expertise in the room and the ownership in the room to go make these things happen. When I tell my my data mesh story, I start with something, and it's just 3 big steps, right? And people think in threes, right? 30,000 foot view, 3 big steps. There was a question in the chat on fabric versus mesh. You'll hear an answer to that here in a second, and we'll see if it's helpful. This is the way I describe it, Andy, right? So first and foremost, I say the first step for any data mesh is about connectivity. And actually, I would say it's also the first step for any data fabric, right? A data mesh and a data fabric in that first step are achieving the same objective, right? It's about connecting decentralized sources. That's the win. A lot of organizations, when they start their data mesh journey, they actually stop there, right? That people get promoted, right? You're celebrating with champagne and flags when you're able to connect decentralized data sources. That's where a fabric ends, right? That's where a data mesh is just beginning. Because the data mesh then says, great, we've got these diverse, decentralized data sources connected. Now I've got to find a way to serve that to the business, right? Back to your point earlier about kind of being focused on the data products. I'll come back to that in a second, but where a data mesh differs from a fabric is where a fabric is saying, hey, great, I've connected the sources. It's all on you, consumer. A data mesh says, hey, consumer, come into the room and let me figure out how to help you use this data. Great that I've connected it. Great that it's here. Now let me design it in a way that you can actually consume it. So data mesh introduces this notion of logical domains, right? These are domains that you can then come into. So if you're in finance, you can imagine a domain being your virtual room that you go into, and all the data you need, all the finance data you need is in your domain. You don't care where it is. It's an SAP, it's an Oracle, whatever. You abstract that in a data mesh. I've designed a domain where you have access to all the data that you want. And you can work autonomously, because us IT guys, we don't know your data. Like I can store it. And if you were very picky and very specific, I might be able to transform it. But at the end of the day, our business teams, our consumers know the data much better. So we allow them to work autonomously, right? We give them the tools and the training to manage their domain with autonomy. And then the real magic happens, step 3. Now you're able to start to create these data products, right? These aggregated data sets. And you say, I'm going to pull a table from SAP, and I'm going to pull a table from Oracle, and I'm going to pull a table from, some Azure Lake. I'm going to bring it together in an aggregated way. And then I'm going to describe it. Here's what it is. Here's where it came from. Here's who owns it. Here's how often it's being used. Here is how you should use it. That metadata, that's a data product that you can share, that works in different platforms. I want to use it for a dashboard. I want to use it for an algorithm. I want to use it for a machine engine. That's a little bit, it's hard to do, by the way, but that's the vision, right? To be able to use this in an interoperable way. That's a data mesh. It's the connectivity, it's the organizing it in a logical way for the consumer, and it's the creation of data products that people share. So I don't get into the details, but I tell that quick story because I think it, hopefully people will like, oh, okay, I think I get the concept. And if you're with us with the concept, now I think, Andy, we're ready to jump into the book.
Interesting. It's a very different way of describing data mesh. It's but it, you know, I can see for your audience, for your people, you know, I can kind of see that maybe that resonates in a different way.
And here's why I think it does. For a consumer, they don't really care about all the details, right? They're like, tell me how I'm going to use it. Data mesh by design is designed for the consumer. So when I explain a data mesh, I try to explain it for a consumer, but it's one thing to get, it's one thing to get the consumer excited about it. And then we need smart people like Andy to go help us build it, right?
Well, but that makes sense because, you know, going off book for one moment, and I'm going to come out to the questions before we get into the poll, if that's okay. But so I've been talking to a bunch of CDOs around this, and something that came up recently was first rule of data mesh is don't mention data mesh. So don't tell the consumers, the end users, because they frankly don't care. And to some degree, they don't care about data products. What they want is they want like a report, or they want insight that they can then use. And they want the ability to go and modify that thing that's producing that insight without having to rely on someone else. Right, and that's that. So from, if I think about it in that way round, that very much fits in with what, you know, you're kind of espousing here with these three areas. I think that, you know, that kind of CDO level discussion, I think this fits very nicely with that. If I may just jump to the questions, there's 3 questions that we've got. There's 2 on the Q&A, which I'll come back to. So the fabric data mesh thing comes up a lot. So I'll be as brief as I can on this. The way I think about this is data mesh is about organization, people, skills, technology. Data fabric is basically a technology play. And I think there is an argument to say you could use data fabric as part of your self-service infrastructure platform in a data mesh. Now, I say you could, and the reason I say could is because, and you know, I'll leave this as an exercise for the viewers. If you go off and do some research on data fabrics, there isn't really such a thing as a data fabric, and that sounds a very controversial thing to say. But the reason I say that is you go look at Forrester, look at Gartner, look at the various analysts; they've all got their own definitions. Where with data mesh, we have a book. You know, you can argue whether it's right or wrong. We have a book, we have a single source. Data fabric, there's lots of different definitions. One of the things the data fabric espouses to do, and I think this is Forrester. Is automation. And so, if we think about data fabric and data mesh, and we think about source-aligned data products, and we can come back to those in a minute because they're sort of mentioned in the book if people are interested. Actually, I think there's an interesting play there with a data fabric which can go away, look at the source systems, and automatically generate source-aligned data products, so that when your domain users come in to build, you know, what we call consumer-aligned data products, or data products that are kind of for a specific reason, they immediately have some data that they can start with. They have some, you know, they have a platform. So I think actually data fabric and data mesh, they're not either or. You can use a data fabric, depending on the definition of, as part of the self-service platform within a data mesh. And I think actually there might be some value as the data fabric things get more mature over time. I think they might have more value in a mesh.
I'll add a quick step to that. I think that's spot on. I think some companies start with a fabric, and as I said earlier, once they get to a point where they're great, they've got data connected, then they mature to a mesh. It doesn't mean one is better than the other. And you may not need to mature to a mesh. Mesh isn't for everybody, right? You mature to a mesh if you said connectivity isn't enough. Right now, I need to find a way to help my consumers access data then you need a mesh. But there's some fantastic things in a fabric, to your point, like the, knowledge graphs, right? And relying on AI to recommend different data sets. That's brilliant. I mean, why wouldn't we do that in the data mesh? We should do that in data. Some people would argue in a data mesh, you rely more on the the domain owner and the data product owner. You're relying on a human being to pull data sets together. Whereas in a data fabric, you're trying to rely more on AI. But for anyone that's ever built a data fabric, right? It's relying on an AI engine to recommend data. It's not easy, right? You got to have all your metadata perfect. You got to have all your data. So neither one is perfect yet. But I think when you start to pull the two together, to your point, I think you have some really fantastic opportunities to kind of progress the value of what you're trying to deliver. So.
Yeah, thanks. I'm going to jump into the other. So I don't know if I think the Q&A is kind of anonymous, so I won't mention the names of the questions. But one of the questions is how can we? I think it's how will economies of scale be achieved without a single source of truth rather than multiple sources. So the way I think about this is that there is a single source of the truth for each entity. It's just that each entity. So if we just look at it from a logical data warehouse, in a logical data warehouse, you kind of have subject areas. So we have things like a customer, a transaction, a product, or whatever, and then when we physicalize that, they may be tables, we may have star schemas or snowflakes, or, we're going to have, mapping tables and things. But actually at that logical level, I would say, and actually I've seen people talk about it in this way, the data products are, or the output, the data within a data product, and we need to be clear about that, could be considered to be analogous to like a Kimball data mart, right? Now I know Kimball went out of fashion and Inman integration and everything is kind of the thing that everyone went down. But for a while there, Kimball data marts were kind of in fashion and whatnot. And in that case, what you're kind of saying is, let's say finance is responsible for this finance data. And let's say sales are responsible for this sales data. Now, obviously, these data sets, these data products need to be interoperable, and this gets us into federated computational governance. But actually, really, we still only have one source of the truth. Now, we can build things on top of those, and we can join them together and whatever. But actually, I always make the point that one domain should own one record from source to consumption. And what I mean by consumption is kind of maybe the first or the second data product, and then maybe we have third and fourth data products which are from other domains which are consuming that data product. But I don't actually see data mesh as not being one version of the truth. I think it is one version of the truth. It's just one version of the truth that different parts of that truth, different people are responsible for, and the federated computational governance is there to ensure that they're interoperable.
It's always so much easier. Yeah, it's always so much easier to go second on a question because I get to listen to all your input, and then I get to think about it while you're talking. One of the things in the question, I think they were talking about economies of scale. How do you achieve economy? I think you meant economies of scale. How do you achieve, without a single source of truth? I will let's dance here a little bit, Andy. Jamak on page 26 says data mesh does not enforce the idea. She's pretty hard against it, right? So in some respects, you would say it's not, but I think that the way you have to think about it, if you're thinking about economies of scale, the scalability issue, actually, we think we have a scalability issue on the IT side. The bigger scalability issue is on the consumer side, right? How do you scale all that data and put it to work for your consumers? That's the issue that we're solving with data mesh. To try to solve that, one of the most mature data meshes I've seen, a fantastic one, believe it or not, works on a single lake. They put everything in the lake and it wasn't good enough. They still could not keep up with the demand on the consumer side. You can't model data fast enough for all the different consumers that everybody wants it modeled differently for different purposes. So data mesh, to manage economies of scale, says, let's build a mesh model. Let's give people domains. Let's give them access to their data and let them model it the way they want to. I love, by the way we do that in Starburst. That's I think how you achieve economies of scale. That's the challenge. Hey, just in the interest of time, I know there's another question. Do you mind if we go forward and then we'll come back to this question?
Yeah,
okay.
Actually, there's another question in the chat and another question in the Q&A. But let's go forward and come back to those because they're really good questions as well. The problem is that I take a long time to answer anything. So apologize.
No, these are good answers. Sorry, let's go into poll
Yeah.
2.
Yeah. I'm sad we don't get a vote.
I know.
Although this is a hard question, right?
I hope
Maybe I would.
it's the problem with this question, and maybe I'll apologize for not setting it up differently, is that we only offer people a single choice. Because I think people are looking at this thinking, well, it's that and that and that, you know.
So
but
maybe
if
it's the main thing it means.
if you had to pick one, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So the poll is what does data mesh mean to you? And the options we've got are improved business agility and scalability. I would probably go with that, but you know, I don't want to influence the audience. Faster access and accurate data delivery. That's a good one as well. Flexibility and independence. So that's, yeah, I could go with that. Platform connectivity and data security. I think that's definitely an Adrian one. Cross-functional teams for improved transparency. Cross-functional teams. Yeah, I can, yeah, interesting. And get more out of distributed data and other. And if anyone, how many people? We've got one person that said other so far. So if you're the person that said other, and you want to put what you think that is in the chat or in the Q&A or however you want to do it, then I'd be quite interested to know what that other is.
I have another. I would say and I got this from a customer recently. For them, the most important thing, the data mesh was perfectly designed to drive their digital transformation or to drive a data-driven culture. I can't even pretend to have a data-driven culture if I don't have a mesh concept, a consumer-focused concept. Cool. Let's good stuff. We'll keep monitoring the Q&As and the chats.
Do we press share results? Does that make it come up on the screen? Should we do that? Okay. So I just in the interest of kind of talking through these a little, I would agree. I think 45%, nearly 50% of the audience are kind of saying that improved business agility and scalability is it's kind of what data mesh means to them. Faster access to accurate data comes second, about 25%, and then flexibility and independence at sort of 10%, and then we've got some others which are other and get more out of distributed data, etc., which are much further down. So I think improved business agility and scalability. I think that very much kind of resonates with the with the way that I think about.
Well, we got 140 pages to summarize, so let's get going here. All right, fantastic. Oops. All right. So now we've kind of set a foundation, if you will, a little bit with you heard Andy's story and my story. Hopefully that you can put them together to kind of get a comprehensive understanding for what data mesh is. We also had a bit about why data mesh at the onset. Now what we're going to do is to prove that we are studious, right? We're going to actually start to kind of jump into starting from now we're not going to go page by page, obviously, but there's some things when you read through the book that you underscore and you highlight that make you think. I think we'll share with you some of those things that we kind of highlighted, things that we thought were important. I also, where we can, with the interest of time, is we'll share some practical experiences. We'll see if we can do both. We'll have to rush. We got roughly 25 minutes or so to kind of get through this. Great. So let's jump into the book. Before we kind of get into that first domain chapter, there was a prologue and there was a why data mesh at the beginning. There was something that I caught in the prologue that I wanted to mention is it talks about, refers to 2022 and we're in 2022. So it feels brand new, but one of the comments Jamak made is like, we're using this fake company Dash or something like that, and because we don't have any mature, examples out there yet. I don't know. It feels like so long ago now, because I will tell you right now, today, right, September 2022, I've seen some great data meshes in finance, in pharma, right, in kind of, different industries, so to speak. And I suspect the audience has as well. It doesn't take a lot of Googling, or, you can find these great use cases. There are some whether you call them mature or not, I don't know. I don't think anybody's actually fully achieved federated computational governance, but they've achieved elements of it, right? And so we've matured very fast, I think, in a short time frame. And I think the reason why we have matured is because, and I say this to people, they're like, well, data mesh, is it hype? I love the way Zhamak, I don't know if you caught at the bottom of some of the certain pages, she'll refer back to the principle that it's based on, right? Product thinking. This isn't brand new. It's a principle that's been around for a long time. Domain driven architecture, it's been around for a long time, right? So there are some fundamental principles like agile and DDD and product thinking that data mesh is based on. So if somebody says, yeah, it's hype, it's like those principles aren't hype, right? They're proven, they're tested, every company in the world is using all of them, if not most of them. And if you bring all those together, so anyway, to me, that's what I got out of the prologue was this is a framework that people can read and understand based on sound principles that you have to figure out how to apply it on your own. So anyway, sorry for that, Andy. I just felt it was important to kind of lay that out.
That's fine. Are we? If we're going to dive into the book, I would like us to start with page 5 of the kind of the main part, because I think there's a lot on that page that covers a lot of aspects. The shifts.
Yeah, so, I love that. I think I want to tear that out and put it on the wall.
So for those that don't have the book in front of them, there's a section on page 4 and 5. There's a picture on page 5 that kind of goes through. I don't know if we've got it on a slide somewhere, but
we don't.
But the shifts really talk about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 shifts, right? So the move organizationally, right? So data, there's a big organizational component to data mesh. So it's moving from centralized data sort of management to distributed domain ownership. It's moving from a monolithic approach. So putting your data all into one thing, and then moving away from that and just basically having the data kind of wherever it needs to be for the operational side as well as the analytics side. And we can come back to some of these in a moment if you want to, Adrian. And then things like technically, right? So we've got data which is a byproduct of code as opposed to it basically data and code becoming one. And that's really part of this kind of product thinking. Operationally, and actually this answers one of the questions, this concept of governance, right? So governance being, I think someone asked, is it a hindrance? And I think today very much people go governance. You know, and actually, if you think about mesh and governance becomes an enabler, and it almost becomes, or it should become to some degree, transparent, right? You shouldn't know that governance is going on apart from those things that you're responsible for, which I'll come on to on the next one, which is or is it this one? Maybe no, it's part of that actually. So if I just
you're skipping ahead, Andy. That's page 83 where they say
I'm still looking at the picture, right?
Governance is invisible. It is automated and abstracted. Yeah, sorry, go.
Yeah. So no, but one thing I'll say on this operational thing, right? Because I think there's a really important aspect to this, which is and I'm jumping about a bit, but it kind of leans into data product, which is that the data product itself should have the rules of who can see the data. Right, so that's a really interesting thing. You're not kind of going to the data platform and saying, Andy can see this table. What we're actually saying is in the data product itself, I as the data product creator who lives in finance or marketing, I'm saying that these sorts of people can see this data. They can use this data for whatever purpose, and that makes a lot of sense, I think, because I know the data best. Like if I, just thinking about GDPR and that sort of thing, I should know how this data can be used more than anyone else, because I own data from the operational system all the way through to the serving. So I should know how that data should be used. So I should be responsible for the policies. So I now have the ability to just put policies as part of my data product. At some point later, when Adrian or whoever uses my data product, those policies are enforced. I don't care about that. All I care about is, I'm putting those policies in. And there's an interesting discussion for another day about RBAC and ABAC and how that should all work, which we'll leave for a moment. I'll get back to the shifts. There's 2 more which I haven't mentioned. So this principle of data as an asset versus data as a product. And I think this comes back to how you value things, right? So do we value things by the number of rows, or do we value things by the number of usages of the data? And I think that's kind of the shift in a nutshell. And then the last thing is this, infrastructure. So very much today, we have this concept of a load of operational systems, a database sat behind a CRM or behind a website, website traffic, logs, whatever, phone applications, and that we're all capturing that and doing some stuff over there. And eventually that's going to make it over into this warehouse or cloud data warehouse or repository or whatever lake. And that's what we have today. And really what the shift here is basically saying, actually, we're going to bring those together, not running on the same platform, because, you know, there's lots of reasons why we wouldn't want to do that. But bringing them together from a domain perspective. So the person in the domain can just access them both as if, you know, as if they're one and the same. They don't necessarily have to be the same. And then that's kind of the summary of the shifts, but there's an awful lot.
I think
in there.
Let's start keeping notes of pages that are worth to tear out. Page 5 is a worth tear out.
Yeah.
Don't tear it out. I mean, put it on the wall. Yeah,
don't tear it.
The one I said earlier, maybe copy it, right? Page 96 is another one, right? That diagram I mentioned earlier. Hey, I think the shifts, we could talk for another 20 minutes about the shifts. I think that's a fantastic diagram. It's a great way to think about data mesh. I'm going to skip to the next chapter. Let's talk about domains a little bit. There's a couple of quotes in there that I kind of wanted to cover. One of them on page 20, we talk about the archetypes. We talk about, and I will say, I think at the time of writing, you try to come up with some examples. There's a lot of different ways to organize your domains, right? I've seen a lot of different ways in a lot of different customers, but what I would say is, Jean-Marc refers to 3, right? The source aligned domain. You would say, here's a data source, put it in a domain. I don't see that a lot, but it's possible. You could possibly do that, right? I prefer domains that connect to multiple sources, but again, you could do that. The second one is and I'll come back to, well, the next one I want to talk about is the consumer aligned. That I see a lot, right? I love the idea of sitting down with a set of consumers and designing a domain that works for them. The other one she references is the aggregate domain. I'm going to dance on that one because I don't like that one. I don't like it. To me, the governance, which you kill your auditors when you start to create. And I think that's more a function of the tools you're using. If you're in a tool where you're having to kind of aggregate domains, we don't do that. I wouldn't do it in Starburst, right? I mean, if I like something a domain has, I would prefer to go to the source. Why would I copy it from something else? I would go back to the source and write my query there. But again, different ways to do it. That's an opinion there.
Can I be controversial on this?
Please, let's dance.
Because I have a different. So I read this a few times and I was like, WTF? For this. What is an aggregate domain, right? What's an aggregate group of people? No, and what I think is that I actually think this text is in the wrong section of the book. So this is my controversial piece. I don't think about those archetypes as being domains. I think about them as being data products, right? So if we think about a source, so if I think about the domain is finance, right? But in finance, I might have a source aligned data product, right? And that source aligned data product is basically my first data product, which is the thing that connects out to the source system data, kind of feeds it in, or is a view, or whatever the mechanism is, and maybe does some minimal cleansing or transformation. But really, it's every record. It's like it's kind of our representation of the source. Then, still in finance, I'm going to create a consumer data product, which is useful for me in my finance team, but also is useful for others, right? So I think about source aligned for a moment as being like an internal data product. The data product that's used internally. There may be use cases to expose it for other domains, but mostly primarily internal for me then to build my consumer aligned data products on top of.
Yeah.
Then the aggregate one makes more sense, right? Because the aggregate could be bringing together some data from one of my consumer aligned or source aligned data products with maybe a data product from somewhere else, right? And now I've got an aggregate data product. So I think about this in a slightly different way because I can't think about aggregate people. It doesn't make sense.
I'm going to pull a salsa move and just sidestep a little bit away, but I don't want to run out of time, so I'll make it right. Let's go to for the next 3 areas. I'll pick something from that chapter that I liked, and then maybe I'll let you do the same, and then we'll just go back and forth that way and then maybe we'll get through, and then we can get back to do some more Q&A. So just to close domains, we had a question earlier about economies of scale. If you look at 25 on page 25, there's a notion about allowing every domain to model its data in its own way. That's economies of scale. But let's move on to data products. On data products, let's see, what do I pick? There's so much in this chapter, I think, to cover. Well, there is something actually that I disagreed with a little bit. And I had to think about it some more. It talks about well, where was it? Where was that bird pick? There was a strange bird pick. I can't remember where it was now, But anyway, going back to data products, there's this notion about shifting accountability to the left, right? Shifting accountability upstream. I think that's right. And I think if you're reading the book from the beginning, you get to this chapter and it leaves the impression that in a data mesh, the accountability is going to be back at the source. I think, okay, part of that.
It's quality. You're thinking about data quality, I think. You're pushing the data quality and that stuff back up to the source.
I think what a data mesh does,
yeah.
I think what we're actually doing, and I will tell you, I think chapter 16 or further down the book, she comes back and explains this better, I think, but early in the book, this might toss you for a loop. That's not really what's happening, right? There are greater accountabilities, I think, for data in the mesh, and there's accountabilities from the right to the left. If you're a data product owner, you have accountabilities as a data steward to protect data. So I don't know you're shifting all accountability. It's not what she means. I think you're shifting some, you're basically clarifying accountability upstream, but you're also creating new accountabilities downstream. So anyway, that's my one thing. What's your thing in data products?
Again, if I'm being quite controversial, the one thing I would say is the data products chapter really focuses on technical attributes of data products. You know, I can access it, I can find it, I can discover it. But what it doesn't really labor, and I think this is really important, is the business value, right? So and it does talk about, you know, a data product should be valuable in its own right. But that's not quite what I mean. What I mean is, how valuable is this data product compared to that data product? And I think this is important when you're thinking about like your first data product or, you know, the next data product, because it's gonna be an investment in time and effort. And so I think that area is not well covered in this chapter. So that would be my kind of high level observation. It's not like there's a particular page. I mean, there's an interesting picture, I think, baseline attributes on page 33, figure 33, which talks through these technical things. But that for me is something that I think is missing and kind of left to the reader.
Yeah, where somebody listening might say, hey, you're skipping the most important part, the addressable, findable. We covered, if you remember, we started off with some of those basics early in the kind of in the discussion today. We kind of started with describing a lot of detail for data products. So we haven't skipped it. Just if you joined late, rewind a little bit, you'll capture all that. But we're just trying to capture a couple of key points. Let's talk a bit about, and again, data products is a 2-hour show. We wanted to get into it.
Yes.
Self-service. There's gosh, I've got a lot here for self-service that I want to talk about. First and foremost, I'll say, to me, this is it's hard to say it's the most valuable part, because data product will probably be for number one. This is a close number one. I think in any data mesh, if you can enable self-service, if you can enable your teams to do more on their own, and I'm not talking about just the IT teams, I'm talking about the consumers. Some of my colleagues will disagree when I say I want a non-IT person being able to build their own data products. That's crazy. Is it? Is it crazy? Because if they can, they're going to move really, really quickly, right? We had a do-it-yourself program at my last company, and I was amazed at how quickly business people picked up Power BI and Power Automate and some of those tools, and the messages back where this is easier than Excel, right? And so I think we don't underestimate how empowering it is and how easy it is for these teams to pick up the skills. So self-service is super important. But there was a comment there about page 62 that says, designed the APIs and protocols first. I think that's right. My only circle, I think what circle is APIs, right? I don't know. I think on the front end, when she talks about using APIs for data products and making them available, that makes a lot of sense. But on the back end, for any one of us that have done kind of big bad API management, I'm not sure that's the best way to actually connect to a bunch of data sources, right? I mean, I'm being biased. Somebody will say you're Starburst. Tree knows the magic. Yeah. Oh yeah, of course. I mean, that's my position for sure, but there's other ways to do it. I'm not sure API would be the first thing that I would point to.
Yeah. Also, if you go and spend a lot of time on building an API, a set of APIs, there's a question about, well, when you get in business value, right? That's an observation.
They bake, they're custom. It's difficult, but again, that's one way of doing it for sure. I would say definitely connectivity first for sure. How you build it, use the best tools available to you. Know their APIs. Go ahead. What's your favorite quote from that chapter?
So it's not quite. It's actually figure 4.2, which is the data mesh platform differentiating characteristics. So it's a compare contrast versus what's gone before and what you kind of need for data mesh. And there's probably two things. There's a lot in this picture, and there's a lot of words that kind of follow on. But there's two things that if I've got time just to sort of pull out. One, actually, and they're related to the same thing, actually. And also, it may help answer some of the questions that we've got around putting all the basically centralized data source thing. Zhamak very much recommends using decentralized technologies. So don't put all your things into kind of one basket. And from part of the reason for that is to basically allow complete separation. So if I've got a data product, and my data product is going to consume X amount of resource, and another data product is going to consume Y amount of resource, we should have a situation where they never conflict and conflate, and that's just at the very kind of technical level. Now, I know you can do that with various technologies. It does become expensive, but there's this kind of whole separation, and then there's this whole not having to wait for someone else, right? So if I want some different capability, I'm just in my domain, I don't want to wait for another domain who has that capability to be able to use this capability. I just want my capability, right? So I want to go to the self-service infrastructure team and say, I need this capability, and they're going to make that available. They're going to select a technology, et cetera, et cetera. So there's this whole, and also there may be some technologies which are kind of orthogonal to each other. So I may have a technology in one domain and a technology in another domain, and actually there's no real way of making those kind of work nicely when it comes to data or data sharing. And then the last piece on this is obviously we've got operational systems, and I'll come back to this. It's very rare that we're going to be able to get operational data, or the systems that use that operational data in the same place as our analytics. Yep. And so the other point that I will, and this is my last promise.
We're about 5 minutes.
Okay, I'll stop there.
But I mean, I want to underscore something you said, because it's important. Is
what
Andy's talking about is when we think about self-service, it's self-service along that supply chain, right?
Correct.
So self-service for the consumer, how are they actually consuming data products? Self-service for the people building data products, self-service for the domain team bringing data in, and to some respect, self-service on the actual data platform. So you put the different platforms you're using. So it's self-service along the way. So
yes. I'll stop. I won't carry on. Sorry, there's more that I was.
Just gonna let's spend the rest of the time just going through some of the Q&A and chat. I'll look at the chat, and I've got the chat open already. I'll give you a second to look at the Q&A. One of the questions on the chat is, if you follow all the principles except centralized data source, will it still be a called data mesh? I don't know that centralized data source is a principle, right? But I will tell you.
No, it's not. So it's not. Right. It's not. It's a decentralized is one of the principles.
No, I think what she means is if I'm centralized, not decentralized, in my data mesh. What I would say is, one of the best data meshes I've seen has a centralized data lake, right? And again, it's not about the infrastructure, it's about how you make data available to a consumer and how you kind of make sure that it's everything we just described, that self-service matter. So absolutely, even if you've got all your data in one lake, all the elements of data mesh, the important ones like domains and data products and self-service and federated governance, they still absolutely hold true.
Can I just add on to that? Because I agree with you, but I think there's also a little bit more detail there, right? So data lake was a really important point. And the reason for that is because I think there's no reason why you couldn't put your data in a lake. But what you don't want to do is you don't want to tightly integrate your engine to that lake. It may be that I want to access that data through MuleSoft API, or I want to access that data as a Kafka stream, or I want to access that data through SQL, or I want to access that data through Scala or Java. If I put it in a lake, that's fine, right? But I want to have the flexibility of different engines.
That's a solid point, Andy, because in this case that I'm referring to, they had already moved the data to a lake, and then they realized it didn't solve the problem, right? For any other company just getting started, you don't do that, right? If you've already moved it there, you can still take advantage of a mesh. If you haven't already migrated your data, stop. You don't have to, right? You can skip all those steps and connect your data where it is, and take better advantage of a data mesh, because you can make those investments somewhere else. But so that's a great clarification. Any big Q&As on that side?
So we've got two. Actually, well, this kind of, someone's made a good point. They've said flexibility and independence does not mean ungoverned. Just to be clear, rather autonomy that enables creativity and innovation. And I think I 100% agree with that.
Yeah.
100%. It's all about autonomy, within the governance rules, if you will, and automating those governance rules. That really is kind of what data mesh gives you. There's another one here, which is, am I right? This is, and I'm going to get on as quickly as I can with this one. Do you want to do do you want to do a poll, and I'll try and read this out and do the answer while the poll's on the screen, so we can sort of.
I love that governance question. I wish maybe we spend more time on that on the next show, Andy, because there's a lot to talk about on federated governance that we might have skipped through a little bit. It's an incredible value opportunity when you apply governance in the right way for different domain teams. What I mean by that is we have one customer I know that has a domain that's all about discovery and innovation. It's wide open. What I mean by that, wide open for a small set of data scientists to go out there and discover and build and fail and discover and build and fail and when they get something they like, then they have other domains that are much more structured, better change management. It's a different approach because when they publish data products in these other domains, they got to follow a compliance process, so to speak. And sometimes that's not good for discovery. And so again, that's an idea where federated governance makes a lot of sense because you apply the right level of governance to the right team to achieve those unique objectives for that domain.
So I'm just gonna, so two things actually. It just occurred to me that we probably need to do, this has taken us a lot longer to get through than I imagined. So we may have to extend this series a little bit. But anyway, because federated computational governance, we could do a whole session. I just want to, so there's a question in here. So this says basically, am I right that this is a framework to govern people, product, and data, ensuring continued agility and capability in how data is used to build out data products built and consumed by users across the org? I think broadly, yes. And then it says, as a Snowflake user, I would lean on live sharing to deliver capability to the right hands to turn, build data products that offer value to the business. So I'll be honest, I don't know enough about Snowflake, but when we think about data products aren't tables, they're not views. Data products are, the best way to think about a data product is like a text file, which contains declarations. So the declarations may be something like, give me some computers, some resources, give me a compute engine, run this code, which is going to materialize some data, maybe one or many data tables, views, whatever. Then it has declarations around those policies in terms of who can access that data. And then maybe some declarations around, metadata, attributes, discoverability stuff that goes into maybe some sort of catalog. So if we think about data products like that, and now I can chain data products together, so I can have this data product runs, then this other data product runs and consumes the data, which is the output of the first data product. And those data products may be referencing data that's on-premise or in the cloud or somewhere else, because remember, we're bringing the operational and the analytic together. Now, I don't know if Snowflake can do that, but that's the way to think about sort of data products. And if you can do that in Snowflake, then that live sharing bit on the end, which I assume is kind of sharing the data, then that may make sense. But
I'll add one more quick piece to that, and I think we'll thank the audience. We work in a lot of situations. We were sitting right next to Snowflake in a lot of companies, and so great product. I think sometimes you need a data product that's very agile. You need to be able to change it fast. I got to change it. Here you go. I got to change it. Here you go. I got to change it. Here you go. There's a certain speed and agility that you needed to be able to deliver to some data products. Other kinds of data products that are more stable and maybe have very specific requirements, you might be able to model them in a system. And so if you model it maybe in Snowflake or something, and you're like, well, I got to change it. Well, that you got to go through the whole process to change it, right? So when you think about how you're designing data products, think about how you're going to store them, how you're going to change them, how you're going to share them. And that total cost of ownership and that time to insight is really important when you're kind of considering you probably need both. Right, but make sure you're using the right tool for the right place. Andy, this was awesome. I know we were too ambitious with the number of topics.
Yes,
without a doubt.
We should probably just reference the poll quickly, just in case people haven't. I don't know if people can see the results, but I'll just quickly summarize it. So ranking the principles in order of greatest value. Data as a product comes out about 50%. Domain ownership. Interestingly, governance comes out at the bottom, which is not unexpected. But
it depends who you asked.
It does, yeah.
If we were delivering this to info security professionals and audit professionals, they would say, what I love most about data mesh is the federated governance. So there you go. All right. Hey, this was awesome. Really appreciate it, Andy. Really appreciate the audience for whether you're watching live or whether you're watching a recorded session. Please contribute online in the community. We're going to read all that. We'll do our best to answer questions, but that will allow us to shape the next session in the right way for you, which I think is next week. Thank you for joining. Have a great afternoon or a great morning, wherever you are.